Hello everyone, my name is Adrian and today let's talk about Oauth 2.0. That is, a protocol that allows us to give our user options to log in our application using different authorization providers. So here we got two examples. On the left side we got Spotify, where we can log in with Google and with Facebook and Apple. And the right side we have Figma, where we can log in with only with Google. Well, so we're gonna make one of these systems today. It all starts with our user entering our application and choosing one of these options to log in. After the user chooses that option, we're gonna redirect the user to that authorization server he chose, where user is gonna log in on his page, authorization server pages, and gonna be redirected again to our application with the authorization server. It's only the first step. We got more steps after that, but we're gonna pass one of them each time. Let's first focus on this step because this looks very easy, but we need some setups here we need to do, because let's say our application server is gonna get that user that's gonna be redirected with one URL, but that server needs to know, okay, which application that user came from, what that application wants, what permissions that application wants. It wants on to read the basic user information, or it wants to make an operation on behalf of this user. For example, it wants to enter the Google Drive, get information there. The application, the server needs to know this, and the user needs to know this too. So the authorization server is gonna show the user, oh, this application wants to read your information, wants to access your Google Drive. To allow this, and the user will consent of this or not. And after all this process, only after all this process is completed, we're gonna receive our authorization code. So we need to pass many variables here in the redirected URL, but we're gonna analyze all these variables later. Okay, I will use the Google authorization server here, but you can do that with any authorization server you want. It's gonna be almost the same process because all of the servers use this Oauth 2.0 protocol. Let's do that. Well, the first step we need to do to make our Oauth authentication is to obtain some credentials from the authentication server we want. So here at Google, we have, for example, this Google documentation explaining how to use the Oauth 2, and the first step here is obviously getting the Oauth 2 credentials. So we can make it opening this Google API console. So we are redirected here for that web page where we can create this Oauth client. But first we need to select a project, and I don't have any project here because I want to show you guys how to do that from scratch, and I want to simulate if you don't have a project yet. So I'm gonna create a project here. Okay, let's make a Google Oauth 2 project and create it. So the project is being created. Let's wait a minute. Okay, now we have our project. We can go here at credentials, because we need to create credentials. We need to create an Oauth client ID. Okay, before we create our Oauth client ID here at Google, we need first configure your consent screen. Okay, let's do that. So we are asking the user type if external or external. I will put it external. Okay, the app name. Put here again Google Auth 2. User support email. You can put your email here, there, and put also my email there. Okay, and get an error here. Don't know why. Let's try to make it again. To put my email. Okay, save and continue. Okay, now it's passed. Okay, so in this scopes we can just save and continue. When we need to add our email here so we can test. Okay, add it. Save and continue. So basically here we are gonna create our application, and this application is not verified by Google yet, so we are just make them test here. So we need to put which users can test this application. So it's just my own email here. So now we can go back to credentials and create an Oauth client ID. So in application type, we're gonna put web application. You can give any name you want. And here we got the important value, that direct@ URI. It's the direct@ that the application, the authentication service is gonna use to redirect the user again to our application, and which endpoint the user needs to be redirected with the authorization code. So in that case we're gonna put this local host 3000 /redirect. And this is very important because we need to pass this value again in the URL redirected URL for the server. If we see here, one of the parameters we need to pass is this direct@ URI that needs to match with this URL that we are registering here. So save this value, that is very important. And let's create our credential. Okay, now that we create our credential, we need to save these two values, the client ID and client secret. Okay, now with our client created, we can actually build our redirect URL for the authentication server. So for that, in here at documentation we can see that we need two endpoint. In that case, in case of Google, is that endpoint here. Okay. If we just enter this endpoint here without any of the other parameters, we got an error because the error says the required parameter is missing response type, and after we pass response type we're gonna say another required parameter is missing because we need to pass all these 4 required parameters. We can pass another parameters here, but they are optional. You don't need to pass these parameters to work. Only these 4 parameters is required. The first one is the client ID. We already get when we registered and we created the application on the Google Cloud. The second one is the redirected URI that we also get this value when we are creating the application. The third value is the response type that in our case needs to be code for web server applications. So we just pass response type is equal to code. It's very simple, this one. And the last one is the scope. This variable is used to define which permissions the application wants to get from that user. So if we go here, I'll have 2 scopes. We can get a list of all scopes that is available for Google. So you can have the scopes for YouTube, Google Drive, and many others here. But for our case, we just simply use this Google Auth 2 API, so we can pass this OpenID to get basically associate personal info on Google. Okay, so we have the endpoint and the 4 parameters we need to pass. Let's just build this URI. Now I create a new application here using Node.js. I installed Express and .env, so we can make a server here and access the env file here, where I built the endpoint for Google Auth, or client ID that I created there, and our client secret, and of course our redirected URI. It needs to be the same value we created there when we are creating the client Oauth on Google. So I have a page here that only have a link for login Google, and we need now to build this link. Okay, I'll make here const URL equal to, well, first we need to get our process and endpoint, and for that endpoint you need to pass some parameters. The first one is our client ID. Let's pass this process dot end dot client ID. The second one is our redirected URI that we're gonna get for our process 2. Process.env dot rejected URI. The third one is the response type is equal to code. It's hard coded. And the third one is the permissions we're gonna need. This is our scope that I will put on OpenID. So now we have our URL. I put this URL here. It's URL. So when we click in this link, we need to be redirected to the Google Auth page to make our login, and after that we're gonna be redirected again to the application / redirected. That is our redirected URI here. So let's test it. So in our page here we got this link to Google. I'll click this link, and okay, now we can proceed to make our login here. And we got this message saying that the Google did not verify this app yet, but of course we are just testing this app for now. We're gonna create and continue, and the Google now is asking if we want to make the login in that server that we created. I will put continue here, and perfect. Now you also redirected to our page here, localhost, to our application, to that endpoint redirected, and we got here the code that this is our authorization code. Now we need to trade that exchange authorization code for our actually token to access these informations. Okay, so now we made all this process. We create our application in the authentication server. We created the URL to redirect the user to that authentication server, and we got a response again redirecting our user to our authorization to our application, and receiving the authorization code as a get parameter. Well, what do we need to do now? Now we need to exchange this authorization code for an access token. So we're gonna send again to our authorization server our authorization code with a post request. Now we not reject the user again, we are just make a post request, and the server will give us a response with our access token. But you may be asking now, why do we need to do that step? Why our server here just simple give us the access token after the user is redirected? Well, That's because it will be a issue with the security. We need to, the server needs to be sure that is our application that is getting the access token and not just some other application. For that, we need to pass our client secret, and as you saw, it did not pass the client secret here in our redirect, because we can just pass a password and a URL. This would be a mistake. So we first need the authorization code. It's a temporary code that will be sure that we got this authentication permission from our user. And now we're gonna pass this authorization code and our client secret with this post request to our server again, because post is much more secret than a GET request. And with that information, the server can analyze if the authorization code is valid and if the client secret is valid too, and only after that the server will give us the access token. So now we just need to make this step here. Back again to our Google documentation, we gonna see that step 5 is exchange authorization code for refresh and access tokens. And with that step, we can see that the endpoint we want to call now is this /token, and we'll need to pass these fields: client ID, client secret that we didn't pass before, the code that we get before in the last step, the authorization code, the grant type that must be set to authorization code, and the redirected URI again. And here we got an example, and it's important to see that the content type needs to be application / form URL encoded. Okay, so now that we have all this information, all this endpoint, let's create the program for this step. Now back in our program, we still need to create an endpoint to get the authorization code /redirect that we set before. So I'm gonna make a new route here, /redirected. It's the endpoint that the user will be redirected after login. I'll get the request and response. Now the first thing, we need to get the authorization code from the query. So let's make const authorization code is request dot query dot code. Okay. Now that we have our authorization code, we need to make that post request to that endpoint we got from documentation and pass all that values with a URL form encoded post. So I'll make this function async, and I'll get the response. I'll wait for the response for a fetch request, and the endpoint I will get here from documentation. is this endpoint, and we need to pass this as a post request, and the headers, we need to pass the headers as content type, as a form application form URL encoded. Okay, and the body, we need to URL search parents, so we can convert these parents for URL encoded. And the first parameter we need to get is client ID. Get again process.env Google Client ID, and now we're gonna pass our secret, client secret, also from process.env Google Client secret. The redirect URI again, so process.env redirected URI, and now we need to pass the authorization code we got from our previous step, and need to pass the grant type. That's going to be authorization code. We can save. Now let's get the data from the response. Await response.json, and I will want to see that response. Okay, let's see in our browser now. Okay, before we go, we just need to change this authorization code because it's on code this parameter here. Okay, let's save again, and now let's check in our browser. Now let's try to hit the login button again, and now we got our response. See here that we have the access token, that is this value. Now it's a token type appear, and we will expire in this value. So now we just need to save this access token so we can use this to call the Google APIs to get the information or make the operations that we need. Okay, so we go to the next step now. Let's see how this works. After we get our access token, we can save this token on the session, and so we can use this token to make requests to the authentication API, so we can get informations about the user or make an operation on behalf of the user. So for that we just need to make a post request to the API. It can be also a get request. For this you just need to read the documentation about that API, and on that, in every request we need to pass the authentication header and with the access token, and after that the API will give us a response with the user's data in that example. So let's do that on code now. Okay, so now we're gonna use the access token we got to make a request to the Google API to get the user information. Well, first let's make another request here. Put response API and I wait for fetch, and this is the URL we're gonna make the request to Oauth 2 user info, and we need to pass the headers, the authorization. That's gonna be a bearer token, and here we need to get our data.access token. Well, for this endpoint we need to make a get request. I can put here method it's get, and now let's try to get our actual data. I'll await response API.json, and let's see this data API. If I click this link now, I will be redirected again to our redirected page, and here I got the ID and the picture of our user. So this is it, it's working. We got this information from Google using the Oauth protocol. Now if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel.